Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has said he would like a zone to secure arrivals and protect people at Kabul International Airport. Speaking in an interview with news channel TF1, Macron suggested working alongside the UN and the UK in creating a secure area as a way of mobilizing the international community into action.
What
we have proposed and will put forward at the UN Security Council with the UK and Germany is a solution that we know that's already been used in other operations, with the establishment of a zone to secure arrivals to this airport and protect people. I think it's of interest. Why? Because first of all it mobilises the international community, and then because it creates pressure on the Taliban. This doesn't prejudge recognition, because we have set conditions for it. First, the Taliban must respect the humanitarian right and the protection of all those who have the right to be protected through asylum. The second point is for them to be very clear in regards to all the terrorist movements. If they befriend the region's terrorist movements, obviously it will not be acceptable for any of us. The third point is in respect of human rights, of our values, especially regarding the dignity for Afghan women.
Des droits de l'homme, des valeurs qui sont les nôtres, en particulier du...
And Arise correspondent PHILLIP CROWTHER is monitoring the situation from neighboring Pakistan, and he joins us from Islamabad for the latest. PHILLIP, the situation on the ground in Kabul is extremely tense. What are you hearing?
Yeah, tense because the Pentagon has confirmed or has told us that there was a rocket attack with 5 rockets fired toward the international airport. Those rockets intercepted, says the U.S. military, by its missile defense system installed there at the airport. No news at this point on whether there were any casualties. There are images of a car that was burnt and that appears to have had some kind of rocket launcher mechanism in it. And we also have no group or terrorist group, for example, that might have taken responsibility for that in attempted rocket attack on the airport. So the U.S. military clearly succeeding there in protecting the airport while evacuation flights are underway. At one point, according to our reporters on the ground, there were flights taking off roughly every 20 minutes from that airport. Those evacuation flights now being staged entirely by the United States, with all other allied countries no longer taking part. As for other events on the ground, we spoke yesterday, of course, about that drone attack by the United States on at least 2 members of the ISIS-K group that, of course, took responsibility for the deadly terror attack outside the airport a few days ago. That drone attack is really coming into question now as to whether it was successful, as the Pentagon would say it was, because reports on the ground do indicate that there were significant civilian casualties there. The Pentagon saying that this was a car with would-be suicide bombers in it. All of this very unclear right now, but I think the U.S. military, the Pentagon, will really have to clarify this at some point. Too many question marks about a strike by the United States provoking several civilian casualties in Kabul.
Philip, so what's it looking like with this evacuation deadline tomorrow?
Well, it looks like it's going to be done in the sense that the United States is confident that it can get everybody on board its last planes that it wants to. Of course, the number of those that want to be evacuated is much, much higher. And I think the United States would admit also it would like to get more Afghans with connections to the U.S. military, who might have worked with the military, might have worked with the embassy or human rights groups, for example. They would have liked to have got more of those people on board, but the gates to the international airport appear to be firmly shut now. Now, those evacuation flights are very much still happening, and still happening in relatively large numbers. Let me give you those numbers that come from the Pentagon and indeed relayed to us by the White House over the last 24 hours. And that is that 1,200 people were evacuated from the airport over the last 24 hours. That's 26 flights with C-17 planes from the U.S. military. And we said that allied countries, the coalition countries, Americans who've been involved in that war in Afghanistan with the US military from the start, that they were no longer flying people out. Well, in the last 24 hours, there were still 2 of those flights. We don't know exactly which countries, but 2 coalition flights, as the Pentagon puts it, with 50 people altogether on board. But yes, you're absolutely right. That evacuation process is ramping down now, because we are about 36 hours away now from the absolute end date and the end game, if you will, for the United States and the US military presence on the ground in Afghanistan.
Speaking of the deadline to the evacuations, it's been reported, Philip, that the Taliban may allow evacuations beyond that deadline. What have you heard, and how would that work?
Well, look, the key quote is assurances. The Taliban has given assurances to roughly 100 countries who still want to evacuate people past that deadline of the 31st of August. How would it work? We don't know right now, because there are 2 ways, of course, of getting out of Afghanistan, essentially one by air and one is by land. There might be an agreement by which an airport, that is the Kabul airport run by the Taliban, might be staging flights again, maybe even evacuation flights, commercial flights. Most likely, we don't know how soon that will be the case. The Taliban giving assurances to those coalition countries and others that there will be safe passage, essentially, for those who have the necessary documentation. Now, that could be a visa, that could also be a foreign passport. We'll have to wait and see what exactly the mechanisms of this is going to be. So much for what might happen from the airport, but of course the other option is leaving Afghanistan by ground. And there are several border posts that might be opened for those who come with the right documents. And 2 of those, of course, are on the border here between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Those 2 border posts, in theory, are closed by the Pakistani government, not allowing refugees into the country. But if the Taliban allows them to get to this border and they do have the right documents, well, there might be an opportunity there. It appears pretty clear at this point that there will be further coordination between the Taliban, who will be ruling Afghanistan at that point, and indeed already are, but they will also have control of the airport, of course, in just a few days' time. There will be that coordination between the Taliban and other countries, including the United States, past that date of the 31st of August.
And do you see the coordination of these border fleeings? Do you see it extending past the deadline and the Taliban working to allow this to be peaceful along the borders, that is?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, that's the plan. The plan is, according to the State Department and other countries, that there will be those assurances given by the Taliban that this will be a peaceful passage to border points or from the airport, potentially. Again, we'll have to wait and see what exactly the possibilities are for those who still want to be evacuated to get out of Afghanistan. But the good news for them, for those who've been very frustrated by not getting into the airport gates, by maybe not getting the right papers, by maybe not being allowed even close to the airport over the last few days by bigger Taliban checkpoints, there might be hope for those people who still want to leave a Taliban-ruled Afghanistan and get abroad, maybe to a neighboring country like Pakistan first, and then maybe moved on to another country. Because again, here in Pakistan, what we're seeing is that there are some evacuees who are allowed into here, the capital, Islamabad, for example, but only in transit, in theory, that those are people who are supposed to be getting on other flights as quickly as possible, because, as a reminder, that Pakistan is not accepting refugees from Afghanistan right now.
Okay, Philip, before we let you go, would you say to some extent that the Taliban are being given a break in terms of their image, since a lot of the focus is on these suicide bombers? Are they looking like the not-so-bad guys now, by comparison, briefly?
No, that's impossible to say at this point, but there is a PR campaign by the Taliban right now trying to show the world that they are not the same rulers of Afghanistan as they were 20 years ago. What is, of course, extraordinary is that there is coordination between the Taliban and the United States. Those two, of course, have been at war for 20 years now. There is coordination as to intelligence sharing, even when it comes to the area around the airport. That is just something that would have been absolutely unimaginable just a few months ago. So that might give hope First of all, to those who still want to leave the country and those who might be hoping for an actual diplomatic relationship, an ongoing diplomatic relationship between Afghanistan and its new rulers and those countries who have been at war with the Taliban over the last 20 years. That might still be possible.
Thank you for those updates, Philip. Thank you. Philip Crowther reporting live from Islamabad.